Welcome to another episode of the Cleanweb Conversations podcast. I'm Woon Tan, your host, and we're here today at the Open Data Institute office. And in this episode, we've got a trilogue with Chris Adams and Jack Townsend.
Hi guys.
And it's going to be an interesting one because it's one of our first few episodes, so we're going to try a trilogue version of it. And
exciting. See how it pans out.
Yeah. So, Jack, you've been involved in over 10 years as a leader in the web and data innovation, and you're a researcher, an entrepreneur, and a designer. You're actually completing the world's first Cleanweb PhD at the University of Southampton, and you're also the coordinator of a CleanwebUK and the global open sustainability community. Chris, you're a developer and a product manager who's been involved in Cleanweb since 2009.
About that, yes.
Yeah. And you've been involved in a number of Cleanweb projects and companies, including Provenance, Loco 2, AMEE, Green Hackathon, and also you're a co-founder of the Cleanweb London meetup, as well as the Berlin meetup, which has recently started off.
Yeah, we're doing that over in Germany as well, or at least we're trying here.
So yeah, welcome to the show, and
thank you for having us. It's a pleasure.
Yes. So the first question, I guess, is what is Cleanweb? It's always an interesting one to start off, and you guys are well positioned to answer this question.
Christ, now that we've said we've been doing it for ages, now we have to sound all erudite and convincing about this. Christ. Okay, Cleanweb is actually a term which I think it's safe to say that we heard elsewhere, but we really, really liked, as it was a good word to describe this kind of intersection between kind of like web tech and sustainability that both Jack and I have a kind of shared interest in. I'd say the initial phrase comes from, I believe it's Sunil Paul at Spring Ventures. I think he's the CEO at Sidecar, which is another kind of Cleanweb
Silicon Valley.
Yeah. Yeah.
Collaborative, well, sort of Uber-like, I guess.
Yeah, you could imagine, you could think of Sidecar as similar to Uber in that it's a startup which allows people to drive, who have cars, to essentially make use of those cars to provide transportation to other people, possibly in cities which don't have particularly good transportation themselves, saving people from buying cars in the first place. I imagine that's probably the angle they'd be taking here. Yeah, the word was coined a few years ago, and we basically...
And I guess it comes from cleantech meets web, which a lot of people find a bit confusing, especially, I guess, cleantech means a lot to people in Silicon Valley. It doesn't necessarily mean that much to people, but obviously cleantech was a word that sort of emerged, I think, from around the year 2000, meaning sort of environmental technologies, or a new wave of technologies such as renewable energy and other sorts of technologies that use resources more efficiently and reduce the environmental impact of stuff. And so, yeah, it came from sort of mashing up these, well, Sunil was seeing what the web industry in Silicon Valley could do to contribute to the sort of stuff that the cleantech industry that's also in that sort of part of the world was also doing. So I guess that's where the term came from. But actually a lot of stuff was happening here in London in this sort of space before that sort of word was adopted.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the nice things is it's a really, really catchy word to describe the stuff that people have been working on in this field for some time. I mean, James Smith, who you spoke to before, he mentioned that I think he was working on a tool called Carbon Diet before, which was essentially it's a bit like quantified self, but for carbon, CO2 a few years ago, where he would track all the things he eats, all the things he travels, all the things like that, and he'd work out the actual footprint of doing all this stuff, so he could work out his kind of personal footprint. And the idea being is that you'd want to reduce this, so you have something like a diet, really, in the same way that people have a kind of self-improvement in motivation for wanting to eat slightly less food and control their portions, or going easy on the pies or stuff like that. That James was working on things like that for a while, and there have been lots of initiatives and programs and tools and web servers and things out there. But
it seems like 2007 was a big year here, but I think AMEE and Loco 2 were both founded.
Loco 2 has been going for, I think, the initial idea was God, I really should know this. It's a thing I did some work with him.
I thought it was, or maybe I'm thinking another one that was 2007. Yeah,
yeah.
So it's a long time before, because I think it was 2011 possibly that he coined the term Cleanweb.
Exactly. There is, I guess, one thing that might be interesting in this field is there was an event called Kyoto, which is basically nerds who have an interest in sustainability had a kind of conference, and people really got into this idea and got chatting about this, and something came, and that's where a lot of the stuff in the UK, at least, I mean, we can speak for the UK because that's what we know really, and there is definitely other stuff happening elsewhere, probably earlier, but that's what we know. And Kyoto was probably where lots of people who were kind of inclined in this area first met and started doing things with each other. And then someone else comes up with comes up with a fantastic term, Cleanweb, which is really, really nice and catchy, and it's 2 syllables, and you can spell it, and it's good on Twitter. And there was a presentation called "Why Cleanweb Beats Cleantech," which is a really, really interesting, slick, 40-minute long presentation explaining some of the roots of this term and how it's a combination of both clean tech and the web. So taking some of the positives of clean tech, so energy without the massive environmental impact of coal or things like that, but combining that with the very, very low startup costs and the quick speed to market of web and things like that really. And I think that's where the word has come from, and it's slowly starting to go into the kind of vernacular of tech, but it's very, very early days, I'd say.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, as the term was being coined, how has it changed? Like, has it attracted a different set of people, or is it
compared to?
Well, compared to when there wasn't one. I guess what I'm saying is, has the term allowed more people to be involved, or a wider range of people to get involved in?
I hope so. There is. I think we're at. To be honest, I think it still feels really, really early. Like, you see people working in sustainability, and especially in the clean tech sector, they're starting to use this term more and more and more. And you'll see a few organisations which are kind of jumping onto this term. And in America, at least, it's a very, very useful term for kind of VC for I guess VC firms and investors and private sector companies which want to possibly distance themselves from some of the less attractive or less positive connotations of clean tech. Because when you think clean tech, in many cases, you'll often think of huge upfront investment. You'll think of like NIMBY wind farms, which take 10 years to get built because you've got objections and planning and everything like that. So it's, I think the idea of kind of clean web. I think there's other words. I think earth tech or digital energy is another phrase I've used. I've heard people use. I think it's a way to capture some of the sustainability themed fields, but also capture some of the excitement of the web, of being as this kind of massive lever for changing how industries work, or changing how we relate to each other, or just our activities, with very, very little money, and without having to, and where you can see the results far, far quicker than having to wait 10 years for your wind farm to turn on before you realise that, maybe we're not going to get the return that we wanted to get, or anything like that. I mean, I need to kind of put up right now, I don't really work in clean tech, and I'm probably doing a terrible disservice to the industry, but when I've spoken to people who actually do use the term, that's the main thing that I've seen come, that's the main distinction I've seen from there, is the excitement of web with some of the upsides and the environmental positivity of clean tech, really, and some of the, kind of, I guess, fetishization and interest in technology and hope there.
Plug into that razzle dazzle and profitability of those web companies, which hasn't been so reflected in the. It's been a lot of disappointment about the clean tech sector after a lot of excitement about it, sort of in the early 2000s.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. So, when you think of clean tech, from
an investor's point of view,
so from an investor point of view, you've got wind turbines and solar are very, very steady, not super profitable, super exciting things, whereas people find it very easy to get excited about Twitter and Google and Facebook and IPOs and things like that. It's you look at the time taken to get your returns, it's pretty fast, or it's less slow than building loads and loads of big solar panels in places or things like that. So I think that's part of the that's part of the motivation.
I think the point about the speed of return of investment is more because Cleanweb itself is based off IT, and IT is almost by definition exponential in growth, and whereas Cleantech is a lot to do with hardware. And
it's bits
very
versus atoms, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's much easier to kind of change things on a server than it is to rebuild roads or things like that. You know, I mean, it's that's part of the excitement, I suppose.
And in principle, there's an awful lot of inefficiency to be cut out, and a lot of it comes down to sort of making things more efficient. A lot of other than making things more efficient. I mean, there is a whole bit within Cleanweb that is very much specifically focused on clean tech and sort of the catalysis of Cleantech, things that support the rollout of clean tech, such as sort of crowd things like Solar Mosaic and We Share Solar and Abundance, who sort of help you crowdfund to install solar in a particular place.
Yeah, so that's
or
Trillion,
That's sort of connecting the funds and.
Yeah, these guys, what they do is they, rather than only being able, they provide another source of funding for people who want to set up, say, a solar farm or something like that, or a wind farm, or other ways of generating power that mean that you don't actually have to have like coal-fired power stations built, or things being centralised in, say, the big 6 or the big 4 energy providers. So this is one thing that you probably see. And actually, I mean, I'm currently living in Germany, and there is a kind of shift from having a few very, very centralised power stations and people who have traditionally not invested so much power in renewables to having a much more distributed way of getting power, where you don't need quite so much power. You don't need to raise quite so much capital to actually put solar on the ground, and as a result, you don't have the concentration of power, literally, but I mean, political power, but also electrical power within these providers. So you have something more of a kind of market here rather than just a kind of oligopoly of a few people. And I think that there are Cleanweb companies like that. They speed this along because they mean that it's
a very interesting particular strand within it, which is it's sort of the Jeremy Rifkin lateral power thesis, and sort of drawing this analogy between processes of democratization of power that comes with the web, that information is democratized and you can access it in a way you can see your medical, you can very easily learn about a disease rather than having to go to your doctor to learn about it, or you can access you can download music potentially without having to buy a CD or whatever. So this sort of process of democratization, there's an interesting analogy there between that and the sort of distribution, creating a more distributed power system, which is kind of, I guess, what you're touching on a bit.
Exactly.
Which is, and that's actually actually, it's been very popular in America, even at sort of the top of the White House. There's quite a few people have sort of latched on to that sort of strand of thinking coming from Jeremy Rifkin and an interest in clean web sector. But that's only one piece, part of the piece. And I think clean tech, as I say, sort of catalysing clean tech is only one bit, and clean web can mean many other different things as well, I guess.
Just before we move on from this subject, 4 feet away from there, got Open Utility, who are looking to do something very much like this in the UK. I'd be very surprised if they didn't speak. You really should speak to them. They'd be fantastic to talk about this, and probably much more erudite than us.
Absolutely.
One of them has a PhD in this stuff, whereas I don't have one yet. Jack almost has one, but we're not there yet.
James also almost has one.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's move on into some of the examples of the clean web companies that you're more familiar with.
All right. I guess what we could probably talk about, or what might be useful for explaining some of this, is thinking of some traditionally quite energy-intensive activities and how they are changed by the web, for example. That might be one way of presenting it. I probably could point to, in the UK, one company that I'm I've worked with before, and I'm kind of fond of because they're lovely guys and girls, is Loco 2. They, like Jamie and Kate Andrews, set this up quite a few years ago now, and their goal was to basically make it really to make basically booking train travel as easy as booking flights, because when you think about going on holiday in Europe, it's very, very easy to think, oh, EasyJet, Ryanair, it's going to be so cheap, and so simple that I will actually put up with horrific customer service from Ryanair, and with EasyJet, I'll put up with. It's really, really straightforward for me to just think, oh, I'm going to be in Barcelona tomorrow, or I'll go to Berlin here, or I'll go to something like that. Whereas if you try and do any kind of surface transport, traditionally it's a really, really horrific experience. And what these guys did was they basically integrated all these European providers of rail to make the experience pretty seamless. You say, you go to like loco2.com and you type in, I want to be from London to Berlin, or London to Barcelona, and they'll link all the places together, and they'll give you a clear way to do that. Where you can buy tickets and have them either sent to you, or have printable tickets that you can put on an iPad or a phone or something like that. And what they're doing is basically trying to allow you to make the same kind of travel, or travel to the same places, but in a much more environmentally friendly way. So we're talking like maybe 80% or more in some cases when you're looking at the comparison of going by train compared to going by plane. And that's one thing they've been doing for a while, and I think they've just gone on a recent hiring spree, but they're an example of what I would class as a Cleanweb company. Another one, which is tied to another form of surface transport, cars, BlaBlaCar. They do a similar thing too. For people who are travelling between two cities, for example, especially in Europe, if you're travelling between, say, London and Manchester, the idea is that you can say, well, I'm going to London, Manchester, who else wants to live with me, right? Now, this is not a new concept, carpooling, but they've been able to execute on the actual online service and product so well that they've been able to grow fairly fast, and actually...
It's amazing, they've got 100
Yeah.
million in funding.
So they recently closed I think the largest ever venture capital investment by a French tech startup, full stop, not just kind of like Cleanweb. That was announced only a few days ago. No, I think a couple of weeks ago now. But they're an example of taking something you do, transport, which is traditionally very, very energy intensive, and finding a way to still make it attractive, but vastly reduce the environmental impact of doing so. And then across the pond, Jack, I'm probably going to let you talk about Sidecar and Zipcar, because I've been talking far too much, and you're fairly familiar with these guys too, I suppose.
Well, Sidecar are here, Zipcar are here.
Yeah,
I think they're in London. They're not elsewhere. I think it's primarily a London thing. And
so
I mean, that's very much
in London. Zipcar are the American brand, but they bought Streetcar.
Oh, Streetcar, yeah. Zipcar bought Streetcar. Yeah. But they're called the branded Zipcar here now, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to me that's sort of classic collaborative consumption. The idea that you, instead of owning something, you can have access to something as a service. And basically share the ownership of it, or avoid ownership altogether. And it was a very exciting idea from an environmental perspective, because the idea is we can move away from this sort of very consumerist, materialist perspective, actually in a very literally sense, a materialist perspective, where we have to physically own the material in something to feel like, we get what we want. We can basically get the benefits of ownership without having to own it. And so in this case you have a fleet of cars around London, and instead of owning a car, in theory, you can just go and hire one at a moment's notice using a nice app that makes it really easy to use, easy to book, easy to access the car, find out where the cars are, and also even open the door on the car, which is pretty impressive, just from the app. And you go in, and that way you, in theory, don't need to own a car. So it means that you can get some of the benefits of ownership without having actually. So the number of cars that need to be bought to service that many people is hugely less, and also parks and all the other sort of resources implications that come with it. So that's the benefit. That's the promise.
And it, probably worth talking about. Should I chat a bit about Sidecar and Uber at this point, because they're kind of a similar ilk. They're sometimes considered, or there's kind of a conversation about these guys as also collaborative consumption and companies to reduce the impact of mobility in this fashion. Sidecar and Uber both have this idea that if you own a car, you're able to basically share access to that, so you'll be driving people to other places. In a similar way to a little bit like Zipcar, but whereas Zipcar maintain a fleet of cars, the idea with Uber or Sidecar might be that you yourself you have a car and then you're driving other people around to do that. Now, it's a bit of a contentious issue, this one, for various reasons, but it doesn't stop them getting absurdly high valuations about how, because in many cases it represents a change in how people perceive mobility.
All it's doing is disrupting the taxi market and replacing it with a sort of a different way of doing things, which is centered in Silicon Valley and is largely disintermediated. I mean, this idea of disintermediation is a bit of slang, but the idea that you get rid of the agents, whereas you'd had a taxi company like, say, Addison Lee before, who the web, you see it across lots of industries where there were previous markets with agents in, and you can move to a place where there still is an intermediary because it's often the website or that system, but it's often automated. There's not necessarily a human being involved.
Yeah.
So it's not really disintermediation, it's kind of a reduced intermediation. There's still intermediary, and but yeah, we're seeing this effect of the web. I mean, the web has disrupted so many different industries, and it's often with this sort of process of disintermediation. Whether that has anything to do with the environment is the moot point, I think. I wouldn't, personally, I wouldn't see Uber in that light. But I mean, what would you say to that?
I think you have to build less cars to get people around, but like I'm not really sure I kind of class it as specifically a Cleanweb company set up with that kind of goal. But it's interesting and it's kind of unavoidable. There's this kind of sense of inevitability because they have so much funding set aside to them, being thrown at them at the moment to expand so far. I think one thing that's probably interesting is that in America, I think in cities which are really, really well served by public transport, so like in London at least, or lots of European cities which do have very good public transport, Uber isn't such a thing yet, I suppose. Whereas in America, if you don't traditionally have that kind of if you don't have such good public transport, and traditionally you haven't, because there's been a much stronger focus on owning your own car and relying on that as your way of getting around. I think Uber serving a city versus everyone else buying their own car, it represents a...
But it's just taxis.
Yeah.
In what way? It's just taxis. What's different? It's a different way of doing taxis.
Yeah.
But it's not. There were always taxis before. They're slightly cheaper taxis.
Yeah.
But so what difference does it make? It's not. It's not affecting car ownership.
So it's hard to quantify the environmental impact at this stage, isn't it?
It's always very hard. I mean, the quantification of the environmental impact is a very difficult thing to do, and we might probably touch on that in a bit more detail. But yeah, I mean, it's my gut instinct is I can't really see a decent environmental narrative around that. I can with BlaBlaCar potentially, which is ostensibly somewhat similar. It depends. We'll have to see how I guess it's really whether the sort of market creates. Does it mean that people who are already going to be going from A to B then do it with fuller cars, because that's certainly good for the environment, or does it mean that then people start driving around and actually creates a market which displaces people from public transport, where they'd previously taken a coach or gone to Loco 2 to buy a train ticket on a train that was already leaving? So these are complex questions, really. But yeah, I can see more of a sustainability narrative around BlaBlaCar than I can around Uber.
I think this is a good point to talk about Airbnb, actually.
Yes.
That's kind of a...
That's definitely collaborative consumption. Yeah. And I wouldn't say everything that is collaborative consumption is, as we kind of talked about, is necessarily sustainable. For me, Cleanweb, there are many trends across what the web is bringing, and collaborative consumption is one really interesting one, and there are many others. And all of them, well, quite.
Collaboratively owning your own private jet, NetJets, right? That's like a perfect example of collaborative consumption. Not convinced it's a really green company.
And there's lots, around sort of luxury goods, sort of like jewellery and things like that. Considering, well, you could make an argument. One could make an argument, when it comes to, it takes, I don't know, how many tons of oil to mine one diamond or something.
This is part of the problem why we said not quite sure what the kind of definition of this term is, because there is as soon as you start looking at this stuff and you try and look at the environmental side, all these other difficult, awkward, boring questions come up, and it's really, really hard to have and it's very easy to kind of just get caught up in that stuff there. So I don't have a good answer to that. I mean, this is something that me and Jack have gone back and forth with before, lots and lots of times, and other people as well. Is that, and there are.
So I think it's important. I think it's good that we're starting that we talk about the environmental impact and the wider societal environmental impact of web companies. I think they certainly have it. it is very difficult to quantify. When you have these things called rebound effects, which make things very complex, it becomes very difficult to say with accuracy. But I think it is very important to try and think about it and even try and quantify it, because they are having big effects and they are changing things, and they are very disruptive, as you say. And it's important to think about the effects they have on the environment and on people, for that matter. You know, if your particular industry is being disrupted, you're going to know about it as well.
Yeah. So there's examples of transport and how Cleanweb might apply to transport and what effects are, and how that seems quite cloudy, but at least there's something there. It might be worth talking, I guess you were asking about Airbnb as an example. And Airbnb is an interesting one because they've released a report in the last few days about how travelling with Airbnb or using it, or actually I think it's titled, here we are, right in front of me, a greener way to travel with the environmental impacts of home sharing. All right, and this is produced by Airbnb, and the idea, one of the general ideas is that if you have people...
Can you explain what Airbnb is?
Yeah, that's probably worth... Yeah, I probably should do this. So Airbnb is a service that lets you, if you're travelling, you can rent someone else's room or someone else's flat when they're not around or they're around, instead of having to go to a hotel or a hostel or something else like that. And the idea being, some places, if everyone's just using everyone else's existing homes, you don't need to build new hotels. You don't need to build all these new structures. So you save all these resources from having to build a massive new hotel complex. All right, that's some of the idea behind Airbnb. And also the thinking is that because houses are built up, with different priorities than large hotel complexes, they may be optimized. They may be more optimized for, you know, a greener way of living inside there. You know, you're not going to be using quite so much energy because it's your own house, and when you're not doing, you still have to be paying your own energy bills in the same way that, I guess, that energy isn't really visible to you as an owner of as someone who's working inside a hotel complex or something like that. That's some of the idea behind Airbnb, and they've recently released a report about this and quantifying some of this, and they're saying things along the lines of, you know, the properties that Airbnb guests use tend to be greener. I don't think they actually tried to work out I don't think they tried to put a quantity on the energy saved by not building hotels in the first place, but they did look at things of reduced water use, reduced energy use, and reduced waste. So there's a few things that they definitely can do in there, and it's really interesting that they're actually talking about this, because previously it's not a real angle that they pushed before, and Airbnb have often been cited as a really canonical Cleanweb company when they've really used the term themselves before.
Yes, and in effect, although they're not necessarily using the term Cleanweb there, they're putting a flagpole to make an environmental claim, which is so. I think it's again. I think it's great that there's a narrative and there's a story and there's and the beginning of a conversation, obviously around sustainability in web companies, and not just the immediate impact of their IT, and we'll be talking about that a bit. But it's actually the sort of societal impacts of that use. So I think it's great that there's a narrative there around that. At the end of the day, this is a report that's produced by Airbnb themselves, and therefore you have to take it with that pinch of salt. And but I think it's the beginning. It's the beginning of that narrative, and I think it's great also that Airbnb is entering that conversation. Yeah.
I'm a happy user of Airbnb. I'm just going to say, yeah, I think it does. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and in some cases, but the sun doesn't shine out of its arse.
It's been good for my health, because everyone I've ever stayed in has been right on the 7th floor with no lift. So I've had to keep pretty fit going to them, but they're great once you get there. So I mean, we've talked about rebound effects and why it makes this stuff complicated, but yeah. So I mean, I guess that links us on to, I don't know how we're doing for time, but that links us into talking a bit about a lot of efforts in the sort of green IT world where people have been, and I know this is something you're particularly interested in, Chris, about reducing the impact of IT itself, because it can't, IT can't go and try and change the world without getting its own house in order first, can it really?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, you think about computing, IT as a sector is now 2% of global emissions and growing faster than aviation, right? So it's like you're still, like Jack says, there's a clearly non-zero impact, or putting everything into the cloud. I mean, the cloud sounds really nice and sounds really like ethereal and like there's this thing in the sky which doesn't have any impact. But no, the cloud is built of servers, and servers are powered by energy, and energy is nearly always generated by burning coal. And coal is not a clean fuel. And
indeed, you see a lot of the biggest server farms in Virginia, right next to where they practice this incredibly destructive mountaintop removal, coal mining, and so coal is dirt cheap. Even though it's incredibly, it's quite a hot place, I guess.
Well, this is exactly it. It's hot, so not only are you kind of getting loads of coal out of the ground and all the environmental impact there, but also you're doing it in a really, really hot place. You have to kind of whack the aircon really, really hard
in the summer,
to make sure to keep your service from melting inside the rack.
And it's all about cooling.
Yeah, so you've got loads of energy used in both cases. And I guess this is an interesting thing. You can touch on this now when you look at, because there's lots of companies which will very much trumpet their green credentials as in, we're a really, really green data center, we're really, really, really efficient, all right? And there's a very good reason to be efficient if you're running a data center or if you're a cloud company, because after staff, usually energy is your second highest cost, all right? So you want to do everything possible.
It's your competitive advantage.
Yeah, exactly. And like this is, you touched on competitive advantage. This is exactly the case of Google. Google, they're doing really, really good stuff in this area. They are, them along with Apple, are probably the leaders in terms of using clean power for their data center, which is great. I really, really like that. But at the same time, one of the this is actually their competitive advantage in that a lot of Google's IP is wrapped around their proprietary data center design, and you'll see people like Facebook and Microsoft looking to. They're making movement. They are doing things in this area. There's a project called Open Compute, which is very much we're going to share how to make our data centers super green and super efficient too. And in many cases, that's to close the competitive advantage. So again, it's a really, really good planet-friendly thing to do. But it's also there's a very, very good strategic reason for doing it. And it's not just we're making the world, we're only doing it in altruistic terms. But I think that's actually fine. You don't have to be totally altruistic to have a good positive impact here. But when it's presented as we're doing this out of the goodness of our own heart, that's not always the truth. And that's before you start thinking about the impact of, well, if it's really, really cheap to actually put computing into things, and if computing is getting more and more efficient, then there's a very real cost and a very risk that you just increase the demand for computing, and you end up with way more, slightly more efficient computing, which still...
obviously you are.
Yeah.
The capacity is, doubling every year and a half, and so it's perhaps the archetypal example of Jevons paradox, really, of the paradox of making things more efficient. So.
Yeah.
But and we've kind of touched on that already, but there are other things that can be done. Because there's... Yeah, for instance, if you can get all your energy from renewable energy, then the impact of the energy is massively reduced anyway. We've got these wonderful things like green clouds and other server farms that are now based in places with high levels of renewable energy, and also places that are very cold, because it's all about keeping cold in these data centers, and that makes a massive difference, and I think that's certainly a real difference combined with the efficiency. That makes things, has a real impact on the environment. But then, of course, or reduces the impact on the environment in a real substantial way. But then you also need to think that IT is it's not just about the lifetime use of the energy. It's about it's very much about the materials and things that go into it, and also the disposal afterwards, and how efficient and what the impact of those things are. Social impact as well, because a lot of the materials come from conflict regions and things like that. So there's a lot of different things to think about.
So, in the interest of time, should we sort of go on to sort of some of the things that are happening around the whole movement itself? So within London, with the meetup itself have grown over time, and both of you have been.
Might be worth just giving a background on that. Okay.
Yeah.
So, because we can cut this bit out.
Sure.
Do we? Do we really want to get into that? Because that's a whole big story in itself.
Yeah,
I
was just saying,
talked about half an hour already.
Yeah, no, I was just wanting to sort of.
And wouldn't that make a nice, interesting episode on its own? If you see what I mean.
I just want to sort of transition to a nice close that I guess
this is interesting to talk about.
I know.
Where can I find out more?
Yeah, yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's totally cool. Yeah. Definitely send them knocking to the gates of Cleanweb.
Yeah. So for people who are interested in Cleanweb as a movement, what's the best way to get involved, and how do people find out more?
Depends where you are. If this is going to be anyone in America. If you Google Cleanweb, what's probably going to come up is Cleanweb.co, which is a organisation which is run by two people who are led by two people, Chris George and Blake Burrows, who are doing a really good job of getting people running events like hackathons and helping people set up communities over there. There's also like
around the world.
Yeah, and also around the world as well. So that's probably one of the first places to look, and that will kind of list all the communities that they're aware of, and say, for example, in America, various parts of America, in China or Mongolia or anything like that. If you're in London, we've been running a meetup group called I used to help run a meetup group called Cleanweb London, which was essentially people in London who have this interest in web and sustainability meeting on a monthly basis to have talks and generally bump into other people with a shared interest, like yourself, women, actually. Yeah. And if you're in, I live in Germany, and we've got a meetup in Berlin. There's also another one in Munich as well, run by a guy called Julian von Blocher. And there are also people around Europe as well. So in Barcelona, there's a guy called Oriol. Oh God, I forgot Oriol's surname. Pascual. He also runs he runs an equivalent to that in Barcelona. And Germany, lots of countries around, and Belgium also has called Loac Bar. So there's a number of people around Europe who also do this.
And I guess there's lots of similar institutions out there, or organisations that perhaps we're not even aware of. I mean, I know in California there's Data Science for Sustainability, which is really quite active in Silicon Valley, or in San Francisco Bay Area. There's also Geeks for Nature, which I think is out there, which does something somewhat related. And there are various other sort of similar bodies. So just do some Googling and see what's nearby. Get in touch with, we're always happy to hear from people at CleanwebUK, or get in touch with the Cleanweb.co guys.
If you can't get enough of kind of weekly talks and presentations and things like this, then there's a guy called Tom Raftery who at the website greenmonk.com. He runs a Tech for Good podcast, which I found quite useful. It's basically a weekly roundup of the interesting links and interesting events that have been happening in there, and he's been doing that for donkey's years now, actually. And it's a really nice intro, because you don't need to be super. You don't need to be really you don't have a huge background in it for him to actually to get something out of it. And also, Tom is extremely knowledgeable. He's run like a hyper efficient data set. So this is the kind of cloud geek coming at me again. He's been running that for a very. He used to run very efficient data centers in Ireland, and he has a lot of background in this. And the analyst firm Red Monk, they have a kind of sustainability theme arm, which is what Green Monk is, and they're also a good source of interest from there, I'd say.
Cool. So for people who are interested to follow both of you, what's the best way to?
The best thing to
Twitter.
do. Yeah, my name is Chris Adams. I'm Mr. Chris Adams on Twitter. So MR then Chris Adams. That's probably the best way to reach me first. Whimsical stuff like that. I run a website, chrisadams.me.uk, which is a lie now because I live in Germany and I haven't bought chrisadams.de yet. Maybe when my German isn't so embarrassing, I might do that. But right now, those are the two best ways to reach me. Yeah.
And what about yourself, Jack?
Yeah, just Twitter.
Jack Townsend.
Jack Townsend _ unfortunately. And underscore at the end.
Yeah, I think that's a really good sort of nice introduction to some of the Cleanweb companies and the whole movement itself. And I'm gonna wrap up now. Yeah, thank you very much,
cool,
Jack and
Chris.
Chris.
Thanks, Ben. It's been fun.
Yeah.
The Cleanweb Conversations Podcast.